The world was a vastly different place back in 1872 when Jules Verne wrote his famous novel about an imaginary 80-day journey around the world by British aristocrat Phileas Fogg going eastward from London. But in the summer of 1988, Robbins and Meg Barstow of Wethersfield, Connecticut, had the exciting opportunity of traveling around the world in the opposite direction, from east to west.
Meg, the time has come. We're about to start on our greatest adventure, going all the way around the world. You may remember the book written in 1872 by Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days, and the movie made by Michael Todd in 1957, Around the World in 80 Days. Well, we're going to go around the world in 40 days.
And we've been reading all these books, a book about India, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. What a great time we're going to have.
Well, now what we're going to do, we're going to start here in Hartford, Connecticut, and we go across the United States to San Francisco, then down in the Pacific to the Hawaiian Islands, and then we're going to cross over the equator into the southern hemisphere to Australia and New Zealand. And then from New Zealand, we go up to Singapore on the equator, up to Thailand, to Bombay and Delhi in India, then all the way across up to London, and back across the Atlantic home.
Goodbye, beautiful backyard.
On Monday, the 9th of May, we departed from our longtime Wethersfield residence on Stillwold Drive, loaded down with all kinds of travel bags. We were going to be gone for 6 weeks, and, oops, I guess I was overloaded. Our son Daniel had offered to drive us and our bags to the airport at Bradley Field, which was a great help in getting off. We had been invited to participate in an international whale and dolphin conference in Australia, and then to attend the annual meeting of the International Whaling Commission in Auckland, New Zealand. We had decided to seize the day, and since we would already be nearly halfway at these meetings, we might as well return home by going on from there all the way around the world. After farewell hugs, bags and all, at the airport, we boarded our plane for the 3,000-mile flight west across the United States. A century earlier, in Jules Verne's day, they had boats and trains and balloons, but they didn't have automobiles or planes, so our trip was considerably easier. In San Francisco, we were met by 2 longtime friends, Jane and Bud Beebe, with whom we shared a brief airport lunch. And then we boarded an Australian plane, identified by the large painting on its tail of a stylized kangaroo. The long flight from San Francisco out over the Pacific Ocean to Hawaii took 5 hours, and we were pretty tired when we checked in at our small tourist-class Hotel Miramar in Honolulu. We had been to Hawaii before, and we were just going to rest here for a couple of days before continuing on. From our lanai balcony, we could see the luxury hotels on Waikiki Beach, but we had a nice outdoor pool to enjoy while we rested. Our hotel also had an outside elevator with a glass window, which enabled us, when we reached the top, to see beyond the hotels to the Pacific Ocean. Later in the day, we walked to the beach, passing through the beautiful grounds of the famous old pink Royal Hawaiian Hotel, and then we had the great fun of surfing on a giant wave, balancing together on a wooden surfboard, which was part of a realistic-looking 3-dimensional set that had been built in a photo studio to serve as a backdrop for tourists like us who wanted to have a photo souvenir of our visit. After admiring the view of Diamond Head from the beach at Waikiki and stopping for a soft drink on a beachside terrace, we visited Sea Life Park a few miles down the coast from Honolulu. Here they have an outdoor pool, which they call Whalers Cove, where we saw performing 4 bottlenose dolphins, displaying with perfectly synchronized leaps their superlative grace and strength and beauty. While at Sea Life Park, we noticed a large wall with a striking blue mural on it of a dolphin mother and calf. At the side of the painting was the name of the artist who had painted it, Weiland. Viewing these luminous creatures was like looking at a stop-motion scene through an underwater window. The next day, we found the name of Weiland in another place in Honolulu, this time in the corner of a massive painting covering one entire side of a giant apartment building along the main highway. This was a gigantic mural of life-size humpback whales, including one on the far right reaching into the sky. We learned that this tremendous panel, painted in 1985, was at that time the largest mural in the world and the 6th in an extended series of what are referred to as whaling walls by this remarkable marine artist who lives in California and travels the globe painting murals like this in cities around the world, including one of sperm whales on a downtown wall in New London, Connecticut. The next part of our journey was to be our longest flight so far, lasting 10 hours, traveling high above the Pacific from Honolulu to Sydney, Australia. We not only flew across the equator into the southern hemisphere, we also crossed the international date line and lost one entire day, skipping overnight from May 11th to May 13th. The movie they showed us on this flight, appropriately, was the classic Australian western The Man from Snowy River. From our first aerial view of Sydney, we could see what a great natural harbor it is located on and admire the famous arched bridge which connects the south and north sides of the harbor. Sydney, with a population of 3.5 million people, is Australia's oldest and largest city, having been first settled by British convicts in 1788. In fact, Australia was celebrating its bicentennial the year we were there. I bought one of the large-brimmed leather hats the cowboys used to protect their heads from both sun and rain. Australia now has a population of about 16 million, and it became an independent commonwealth in 1901. On our first day in Sydney, we took a boat cruise around the harbor. We were fascinated by the varied images of the city's most famous landmark, the Sydney Opera House, completed in 1975. To us, the glass-fronted peaks looked like the open mouths of giant humpback whales. Australia today is one of the world's leading anti-whaling nations, but we were reminded of its whaling past by the sight of 2 great whale jawbones in the front of the Sydney Yacht Club. Australia is really a very large country, about the size of the entire continental United States. It is both the world's largest island and the smallest of the world's continents, being the only one comprised of a single nation. The national capital is Canberra, several hundred miles to the south, but Sydney is the prime East Coast port. Another of its landmarks is the Sydney Tower, at one time the tallest public building in the southern hemisphere. We had lunch in the revolving restaurant at the top, with a superb view of the entire harbor, dotted with boats and extending out to the narrow, protected entryway from the Pacific between 2 rocky bluffs, seen at the top of this view. On our last night in Sydney, Meg and I experienced the great honor and privilege of having dinner with one of the country's leading Aborigines, the late Burnham, who had done much to try to bridge the tremendous gap between Australia's original inhabitants, going back some 40,000 years, and the Western settlers who have taken over during just the past 200 years. He told us about the Aborigines' concept of the ancient past as dream time, and they're seeking harmony with the natural and spiritual world as interpreted through unique Aboriginal paintings, such as these we viewed in a city museum. Today, Australia's remaining Aborigines granted citizenship in 1960 comprise just about 1% of the total population. The next part of our journey was a flight from Sydney north along the picturesque east coast to the town of Coffs Harbour. It was comparable to flying from New York City to Bar Harbor, Maine, along the east coast of the United States, with beautiful scenery all along the way. Meg wore her dolphin skirt for this portion of our trip because our destination for the next 3 days was to be an outdoor conference center on the shore near Vala Beach. Robbins had been invited to be one of the principal speakers at what was billed as the world's first international dolphin and whale conference. Organized by a group of visionary Australian conservationists, it was an impressive and inspiring gathering of some 150 dolphin and whale lovers from countries all over the world, with a multifaceted program of presentations by researchers, authors, artists, musicians, filmmakers, and parapsychologists. Each day was started with a song session on the beach. Robbins showed a documentary film he had produced called Whales Forever, telling the story of the 15-year global Save the Whales movement. One young man we met was from Nepal, where he was seeking to save a rare and endangered river dolphin. Among other participants was the famous Australian film actor Jack Thompson, on the right here, whom we had seen in The Man from Snowy River. Meg was doing her best to record his comments on tape. Following the uplifting experience of this conference, Meg and I rented a car to drive back down the coast to Sydney. The scenery was beautiful, and though we didn't see any koala bears in these eucalyptus trees, we did find a place where a wombat was on display. This strange animal is something like an overgrown hamster. An unusual number of birds and animals are unique to Australia. Of particular interest to us was the emu, the second largest bird in the world, exceeded in size only by the ostrich of Africa. Like the ostrich, the emu is totally unable to fly, but it is able to run at high speeds on its long, strong legs. Of course, we saw a number of kangaroos, Australia's national native animal, at small roadside parks. Midway along the highway to Sydney, we made an overnight stop at a small motel. Setting out the next morning, it should be noted that Meg is not getting into the driver's seat. No, the steering wheel in Australian cars is on the right. And a foreign driver from America like me has to be very careful to remember always, like in Great Britain, to drive on the left side of the road. At one point, we made a brief side trip to one of the most beautiful beaches we had ever seen. We were told that wild dolphins are frequently observed in the waters offshore by sailing ships which like to anchor here. At one end of the beach is a rocky promontory known as Seal Rocks. It was low tide when we stopped there, and Meg couldn't resist wading out to the strikingly colored black rocks. We stayed overnight in Sydney with some newfound friends from the whale conference, and then we prepared to depart from Australia, having only been on one narrow side of the broad continent. We left Sydney behind on a flight back eastward to our second new country, New Zealand. New Zealand consists of two elongated islands located in the South Pacific, midway between Australia and Antarctica. They are called simply the North Island and the South Island. We flew first to the South Island for an overnight stop at the very British town of Christchurch, halfway down the island's east coast. Then we flew further south over the snow-covered mountains known as the Southern Alps to the dreamlike resort village of Queenstown, on the shore of a beautiful mountain lake surrounded by rugged peaks and breathtaking scenery. We spent 3 nights at the Lakeland Hotel and were reminded by a heavy snowstorm that May is the beginning of the winter season down under. We took a stunning mile-long gondola ride up a steep mountainside behind our hotel for a fantastic view of the long S-shaped Lake Wakatipu, with the village of Queenstown nestled down below along the near shore, and brightly colored mountains looming in the background. From the observation deck at the top, we had a magnificent view of this monumental mountain range known as the Remarkables because of their constantly changing colors. The blizzard we encountered had closed some of the roads, so we were unable to go on a planned side strip to see the marvelous fjords on the western end of the South Island. But we did manage to arrange for a brief stop on our flight out at the fabled Mount Cook Hermitage Lodge. Mount Cook is New Zealand's highest mountain, rising almost 4,000 meters. The wooded trail to a favorite viewpoint was covered with snow and ice, but we were able to find a spot from which we could take a photo of the famous peak towering over a flowing glacier below. We were now on our way north from the South Island to be welcomed at the tourist mecca of Rotorua in the middle of the North Island. Here in Rotorua, we had the opportunity to learn something about the culture of the Maoris, the original Polynesian settlers of New Zealand. We visited an arts and crafts institute where large Maori carvings were on display, including a great long ceremonial wooden canoe. Nearby, there is a thermal area of hot springs and geysers, much like those in Yellowstone Park in the United States, with intermittent eruptions spouting hot water and steam into the air as high as Old Faithful does. Less than 10% of New Zealand's population of 3.5 million people today are of Maori descent, and there have been serious cultural clashes with the now dominant Europeans over the years. But we had an excellent Maori guide at a model village we visited, demonstrating how reeds are soaked in steaming water to be made into colorful native skirts.
Tell me about this village.
I shouldn't say. I'll tell you, the name is Whakarewarewa, and we have about 50 people living here in the village, and they're affiliated to our sub-tribe here, which is Tuharangi. So we have...
well, it's been a wonderful guide. You've been a wonderful guide through all of this part of...
New Zealand may have only 3.5 million people, but it has 70 million sheep. Wool is one of the country's biggest industries, and of course breeding is a major part of it. Before leaving Rotorua, we visited a large sheep ranch and the famous Agrodome, where we watched a demonstration of dog sheep herding. The hefty foreman, who was able to completely shear a large sheep in less than 2 minutes, directed this dog not by words but by whistles. We were quite impressed at this amazing show of interspecies cooperation. For our trip around the world, Meg and I had arranged with our Wethersfield Welcome Aboard travel agency to be booked for individualized tours. This meant that we had prepaid ticket reservations for all required travel, and a couple of times we found ourselves to be the only passengers on a signed-up tour bus.
Good morning, Dr. Barstow?
Yes.
Yes, good. Welcome to this Scenic Tours.
Your name is?
My name is Keith Dooley. I'm your courier driver, your escort for today.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, are we going to have this whole bus just for the two of us with you as a guide?
That indeed is correct. That is right.
Thank you. Good.
This private minibus was to take us north from Rotorua to the major metropolis of Auckland, 2/3 of the way up the North Island. The scenery along the way was not as spectacular as that of the South Island, being more of an agricultural flatland here, but we did discover that cows have the right of way on New Zealand highways. and we enjoyed observing the temporary disruption which they were able to cause to our high-powered 20th century vehicles. We stopped for lunch at a cattle and kiwi farm where we found that they also raised deer, exporting their meat for venison steaks. This was something of a cultural shock for us, since we were used to the commercial slaughter of cattle for human food, but not deer. Kiwi fruit is a delectable addition to any meal and a favorite export from New Zealand. The small, oval-shaped kiwi fruits are grown on vines in large orchards and picked by hand, as demonstrated to us and to a group of Japanese tourists by the woman who ran the farm.
I take them like that, twist like that, and then put it into their bag. Then there's big wooden bins in the orchard.
The most fascinating attraction to me, however, was the tiny kiwi bird, which is New Zealand's national bird and official symbol. Kiwis have thick feathers and long pointed bills, but like the giant emu, they cannot fly and only come out at night searching for earthworms to eat. These pictures were of museum specimens, though we did see a couple of live kiwis at one zoo exhibit. We arrived at the port city of Auckland just at dusk and were treated to a glorious southern sunset. We were to stay here for 6 days, attending as non-governmental observers the 40th annual meeting of the globally decisive International Whaling Commission. The first day we did some local sightseeing, walking past hundreds of runners participating that day in the famous New Zealand Marathon. Auckland is New Zealand's largest and most cosmopolitan city, positioned on a narrow isthmus surrounded by the sparkling blue waters of an extensive harbor. From the old stone-pillared National War Museum on top of a central hill, one can look down over the harbor and see from the many white-topped boats why Auckland is called the City of Sails. We enjoyed the colorful sights on an afternoon ferry ride across the bay before getting ready to engage in the heated debates accompanying the week-long session of the Whaling Commission being held at the Hotel Sheraton. The commission includes official representatives from over 30 nations having an interest in the future of whales. All but 3 countries have accepted at least a temporary moratorium on all commercial whale killing. But Norway, Japan, and Iceland, who have refused to abide by the ban, were the targets of peaceful picketing by Greenpeace and others at the start of the meeting. Robbins took part as spokesperson for the Cetacean Society International, the Connecticut-based whale-saving organization which he co-founded in 1974. But despite all our efforts at this 1988 meeting, we were unable to get Japan and Norway to stop their so-called research killing of hundreds of whales each year, so the global struggle to keep whales alive continues. After the commission meeting was over, Meg and I made one more excursion by rented car to a place called Whangarei, near the northern end of New Zealand's North Island, to visit the hilltop domicile of 2 very special longtime friends, Wade and Jan Doak, who do in-the-water research with wild dolphins and whales, and who have written a number of outstanding books about human cetacean relations. The Dokes lead an amazing Walden-like existence. Their house is a converted metal Quonset hut, and they have no electricity or water other than what they generate and collect by wind and rain.
Jan and Wade Doak, 10 years ago you decided to live what many people would consider a very unusual way of life. What are you doing in this circumstance?
Well, some people call the way we're living here voluntary simplicity, but for us it was absolutely essential. We sold our house and everything we had so we could study dolphins and whales, and from what we learnt from them, we found that it would be more exciting if we tried to find a more gentle way of treading on the planet. And everything we do here is aimed at that.
So you are largely self-sufficient here.
Well, not completely. We do buy meat and things like that, but we try to be self-sufficient.
And all different kinds of plants and fruits and vegetables.
We want to grow timber trees, decorative trees, fruit trees, and all our own vegetables.
You have a windmill for your generating your electricity. You collect water from the rain, and you have solar heat
for showers.
I think it's wonderful. We're so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here too.
On their beautiful hillside, they grow a phenomenal variety of trees, fruits, vegetables, and flowers, relying as much as possible on nature to meet their needs. They have an open outdoor solar shower stall with appropriate amenities and water coming from elevated pipes heated by the sun. The Dokes do maintain a lovely little guest house in the woods with candles and a water basin where Meg and I spent 2 enchanting nights, waking in the morning to a chorus of native birds.
People know you, Wade Jan Doke, by the book Dolphin. And
Years of encounters with whales and dolphins around the world.
one.
Okay.
We had marvelous discussions with Jan and Wade, and being in their company was a priceless human experience. They took us to a paradise-like reserve overlooking a beautiful cove known as Whale Bay. Not on the usual tourist route, this location seemed preserved for the deepest kind of appreciation of God's natural world. With the Dokes' daughter, Carla, accompanying us, we walked down to the beach for a picnic lunch. Sitting on a driftwood log, the ocean water was so blue-green, pure, and inviting that I simply couldn't resist its call. Not having a bathing suit with me, I wrapped myself in 2 Polynesian-type tablecloths and plunged in for a most refreshing dip. That afternoon, Jan and Wade showed us the sheltered anchorage called Dolphin Place, where they moor their 2-hulled dolphin research catamaran. We rowed out to the boat, where we could see the strong net spread out between the 2 bows, which they used for observing dolphins close to the water. They have named their boat Interlock, signifying the wondrous interlocking relationship which they have established between humans and dolphins in the open sea.
Along here, we put our hand down into the water so the dolphins can, we don't try and touch dolphins, but we let them look at our hand. They're very curious as we move our fingers, and sometimes they will come and touch us.
Both members of this unique duo of dolphin researchers and writers sometimes don wetsuits and get into the water off this rear platform to swim, play, and otherwise communicate with their dolphin friends. We hated to leave this watery Garden of Eden, but after one last stroll along the beach, it was time to look toward new horizons and to resume our airplane odyssey around the world. We flew from New Zealand back to Sydney and then took off on the long flight all the way across the vast continent of Australia and up to the bottom tip of the Malaysian Peninsula, where Singapore on the equator lies at the juncture of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. We were immediately impressed with the ultra-modern airport, the tree-lined thoroughfares, and the extremely high-class Hotel Boulevard, where we were to spend just 2 nights. The hotel is a fantastic atrium with 15 floors of hanging balconies and glassed-in elevators. Singapore is an incredible place with a fascinating history. Its skyline is dominated today by modern high-rise buildings, yet its city streets harbor a tremendous variety of cultures, businesses, and residences. We took a sightseeing tour in the morning past the Parliament buildings and then by the famous old Raffles Hotel, where later Meg and I shared one of its specialty drinks, the world-renowned Singapore Sling. We stopped to walk around in different sections of the city, including Chinatown, Little India, and the Arab Street, enjoying all the complex mix of people and places. Singapore has a multiracial population of 2.5 million persons, of which today about 3/4 are Chinese, 15% Malay, 6% Indian, and 2% European. It has 4 official languages, and all public signs are required to be printed in all 4, English, Chinese, Malaysian, and Indian. The amazing thing to me was that Singapore is an island state. It is now a fully independent nation, represented at the UN, and yet it is entirely contained on an island which is only about 20 miles long and 10 miles wide. The island had been a trade center for hundreds of years before the British took it over as a colony in the early 1800s. In 1942, during World War II, it was temporarily occupied by the Japanese. After the war, in 1965, it became an independent republic, and today it is a major center of global commerce. I took a ride on a Chinese junk around the harbor, and I could readily see why Singapore is claimed to be the world's busiest port. Its location at the water crossroads of Southeast Asia helps give its harbor the largest volume of boat traffic in the world. The name Singapore in Sanskrit means Lion City, and a stone statue at harbor's edge sustains the legend of its founding by a large Asian cat. We had heard good things about the Singapore Zoo, located away from the city on the north side of the island. So on our second day, we took a bus to the expansive grounds of the Singapore Zoological Gardens, known as the Open Zoo. The late British naturalist Sir Peter Scott had described this as, quote, one of the few really beautiful zoos. It is beautifully laid out so that the enclosure fences are almost totally hidden. The animals are beautifully maintained in good health, unquote. Riding around the park in a passenger tram, we saw many of the more than 150 species of animals kept here, including these Asian rhinos and a pride of lions, lying in the open, separated from us by just a deep moat. One unusual animal on view was a tiger lion, half tiger and half lion. At the time we were there, they had a special exhibit of rare blue-eyed white tigers from India. We had read about these beautiful animals in the National Geographic, and we welcomed the opportunity to admire them in real life, even though here they were inside a concrete enclosure. Many of the zoo's captive animals are endangered species, and one of the zoo's aims is to help keep them from dying out. These primate islands provide natural habitats for great apes like chimpanzees and orangutans. In fact, the Singapore Zoo is renowned for its special orangutan breeding program, having the largest colony of these long-armed Indonesian mammals of any zoo in the world. The Indian elephant is now considered a semi-domesticated animal in this region, and like horses on a ranch, they are favorite attractions for giving people rides. The zoo had recently built an outdoor amphitheater where trained animals could put on performances for international audiences. The stated philosophy of the zoo was for these shows to provide education through entertainment. We were disappointed, however, to find what appeared to us to be more emphasis on entertainment than on education. These artificial behaviors by the elephants, for example, were in sharp contrast to the tasks we saw performed by working elephants later at a forest lumber camp in Thailand. The primate show did demonstrate the directed abilities of several species of apes, including orange-colored orangutans and black-haired chimpanzees, whose measured intelligence approaches that of human children. They acted out a little drama of cooperative endeavor. A monkey dislodged a coconut from the top of a tree, for which it was rewarded by the trainer. Then a chimpanzee carried the coconut to a large orangutan, whose prodigious strength of jaws and hands enabled it, without any instrument, to break open and tear apart the coconut, something which no human could do. The chimpanzee then dutifully picked up the pieces to deposit them over in the trash barrel to help keep the zoo clean. It no doubt was educational for invited members of the audience to experience some close encounters with large serpentine reptiles, which the trainers wrapped around their necks without any apparent harm. This live interaction with Asiatic pythons was presumably designed to help people overcome their built-in fear of snakes. If animals are to be held in captivity, evidence indicates that keeping them occupied with diversionary activities is good for their health and helps overcome boredom. The high point of our Singapore Zoo experience was having high tea with an orangutan. While we sat at tea tables on the terrace, a trainer brought out a cute and extremely amenable young orangutan who apparently enjoyed, or at least didn't mind, being passed around like a human infant among a crowd of relatives from one visitor to another, obligingly posing in their arms for photos. We believe that it had been bred in the zoo. Naturally, both Meg and I wanted to have our pictures taken with this round-eyed, colorful little cousin as it nibbled on a comforting banana. My Australian hat seemed quite appropriate for this special occasion, as it was passing the giraffes on our way out. On the morning of the day we visited the zoo, we had taken a short bus trip across the causeway connecting the island of Singapore to the Southeast Asian mainland, and spent a few hours sightseeing and shopping in the lower peninsula tip of the separate country of Malaysia, though we didn't take any pictures there. Our final Singapore outing was to a beautiful orchid enclosure, where we had a personal guide. Most of the orchids were not planted in the ground, but hanging in the air with their roots exposed.
Okay, what you're looking at here is you would only get at around this part of the wall. They don't grow into a tree. It is really a plant, and that's about the biggest it gets to be.
Like this bride, we took sweet and colorful memories with us when we left Singapore early the next morning. From Singapore, we flew nearly 1,000 miles north to Bangkok, the fabled capital of Thailand, once known in the West as Siam. We found Thailand to be a land of beautiful people. It is known as the Land of Smiles, and the Thais we met everywhere were indeed smiling, warm, and friendly. We were immediately introduced to the charming custom of exchanging prayer-like greetings by placing your hands together, palms flat, in front of your face, and bowing your head slightly. From our hotel room in a busy part of the city, we could see the mix of East and West. To be honest, after all this time away, we welcomed a quick snack of familiar food at a nearby McDonald's. Our first day tour of Bangkok took us past open street markets on a special personal mission. Back home in Wethersfield, Meg has for many years operated a volunteer nonprofit international outreach gift shop at our local church, where handcrafts are sold made by artisans in developing countries. A number of the shop's beautiful products come from Thailand, and Meg wanted to see their source in person. It was very rewarding to visit two of the Thai handcraft distribution centers in Bangkok and talk personally with some of the people actually involved in the creation of the kind of items sold at our first church.
Can you tell me about what you do here?
Yes, here is the House of Handicraft headquarters, and we are helping the village. And right now we have about 6,000 members.
The church helps the villagers by providing an overseas outlet for their handicrafts. Thailand is famous for its thousands of Buddhist temples, which are known as Wats. In one which we visited in Bangkok, there's a fabulous 800-year-old golden Buddha made of 5.5 tons of solid gold. Stopping at the waterfront, where floating markets engage in brisk trading and boats travel up and down day and night, we could see across the river the much-photographed Wat Arun, the Temple of Dawn, with a central tower 20 stories high. Its ancient architecture, however, is more Cambodian than Thai, we were told. More than 90% of Thais are Buddhists, and we frequently saw groups of monks like these in their orange-yellow robes. The river has been described as being a highway, a fish pond, and a bathtub, which these young swimmers appeared to be demonstrating. We simply were not prepared. As we approached this white-walled enclosure in the heart of Bangkok, for the incredible majesty and shining magnificence of the Thai royal palace that suddenly burst upon us. We had no idea that this grand palace was so extensive, with so many monumental, varied, brilliantly colored buildings, courtyards, temples, towers, mosaics, friezes, pillars, statues, stairs, entrances, and walkways. The name Thailand means land of the free, and Thailand is the only country in Southeast Asia which was never colonized by a European power. Its more than 50 million people are very proud of their heritage. In 1782, King Rama I made Bangkok his capital. He was the first in a long succession of enlightened rulers, all named Rama. Not long after America's Civil War, Rama V, who had been taught by an English tutor named Anna Leonwinens, abolished slavery in Thailand. Today, the country is a constitutional monarchy with the palace both its seat and symbol. After 2 nights in Bangkok, we again took flight in a Thai plane, heading north over endless fields of rice. More than 70% of the Thai population engages in rice farming, to the country's second largest city, Chiang Mai, on a plateau surrounded by Thailand's highest mountains. This northern part of the country is home to many hill tribes who are very skilled craftspeople, and to teakwood forests and elephants. Here we stayed at the aptly named Orchid Hotel, which has a large sign posted in the lobby which says, "Your happiness is our policy." The large outdoor swimming pool in the hotel's central court area certainly contributed to Meg's and my appreciation of this policy. The atmosphere here was a welcome change from the crowded city, and we enjoyed just looking out our window at open woods and rural village dwellings. We visited several local handcraft shops, including one where hand-painted parasols of all sizes were made with exquisitely colored designs. Then we toured a large factory where teak furniture and giant elephant and other teakwood carvings were produced and exported. In the years since our 1988 visit, Thailand has had to limit such exports because the teakwood forests were overexploited and depleted. But at the time, I could not resist buying a beautifully hand-carved elephant footstool made of teak, which they shipped to our home in Wethersfield, where it has since become a guilt-ridden family heirloom. We saw water buffalo at work in the fields en route to what was my favorite destination then, a live elephant work camp in the forest foothills. All my life, I have been fascinated by the world's largest animals, dinosaurs from prehistoric times, whales in the oceans, and elephants on land. Here, we had the opportunity to go right up close and feed and touch these magnificent beasts. These were Indian or Asian elephants native to Thailand and much more amenable to domestication and training than African elephants, which are a different species with more curved foreheads and larger ears and tusks. An essential part of every day's routine was a visit to the nearby stream for a bath and scrubbing. They seemed to enjoy using their long trunks to provide self-service showers. The first record of working elephants in the world dates back to around 3000 BC. Over the centuries, they have, like horses, been used as beasts of burden and as military mounts in war. In Thailand, the elephant is regarded as a sacred animal and a symbol of power and royalty. Notice the squared foreheads with rounded knobs on these Indian elephants and their relatively small ears. Here in the jungle, they are trained to perform logging tasks requiring great strength and skill. We bought bananas to feed them individually before their command performance. You will observe that each elephant has a rider and trainer called a mahout. We learned that each mahout is matched for life with one individual elephant. They are paired when the elephant is a baby and the mahout a young boy. He always rides the same elephant and is responsible for its training, care, and upkeep for its lifetime, which roughly corresponds to that of humans. They have intricate systems of communicating using knees and bare feet sitting on the elephant's neck just behind the ears. We were tremendously impressed at the demonstration they provided us of cooperative log hauling and piling. Several elephants together used their trunks, tusks, feet, and foreheads in an amazing display of coordinated strength and intelligence to push some long, very heavy teak logs up to the top of a stack against some holding poles. They really seemed to appreciate our enthusiastic applause when they were done. This is about as close as you can get to the largest land animal on Earth. Even though his tusks had been sawed off, they were obviously huge, and he could consume a whole loaf of bread in one grab. To me, this eye-to-eye contact was truly awesome. The mahouts were always in control, but I think Meg enjoyed handing a banana to the elephant's trunk as much as the elephant enjoyed moving it from trunk to mouth. To top off our day with the elephants, we were given a ride in a small wooden bench fastened on the back of a large elephant. We got on from a mounting platform, and the barefoot mahout guided the behemoth along the trail for a very swaying but truly exciting jungle ride, which neither of us will ever forget. On the way back to Chiang Mai, we made several additional stops, including viewing a peaceful waterfall in a lovely rustic setting and observing some Thai children playing in the stream bed. And do you know, they don't build sand castles there, they build Thai temples. After photographing some other Thai children in their colorful native costumes at the entrance to one of the hill tribe villages, we were pleased to find ourselves in this remote settlement of simple huts and market stalls, again talking with the very people who made the kind of beautifully handcrafted items which Meg sold at our church outreach gift shop in Wethersfield. Our last stop this day was at a famous hilltop Buddhist temple called Wat Doi Suthep. 2 giant dragons guarded its entrance. Their long, twisting bodies bordered both sides of the stairway, which had more than 130 stone steps leading to the top. This offered a spectacular setting for a variety of centuries-old structures. As is the rule for all Buddhist temples, shoes cannot be worn inside. A sign in several languages gently reminds us that dress impolite can't enter this temple. We were pleased to take off our shoes and show our respect for this venerable religious edifice. I was impressed by the statue of a white elephant that legend says led the founders to this very spot centuries ago. It is permitted for even foreign pilgrims to ring one of the giant bells along the balcony near the topmost golden spire pointing to heaven. From the balcony, we enjoyed a glorious farewell view over the hills and valleys of Chiang Mai and Thailand. After returning to Bangkok, we took off once again for the long flight all across southern Asia to the west coast of the subcontinent of India and the thronging city of Bombay. Bombay's famous Gateway Arch overlooking the harbor is a symbolic reminder of Britain's 300 years of colonial rule in India, which ended in 1947. Today, after more than 50 years of independence, India is the most populous democratic country in the world. As we observed the varied architecture, old and new, of the country's largest city, We felt nearly overwhelmed at the realization of the enormity of India's economic, social, political, and religious problems. Today, more than 1 billion people live in this country. Its size is only 1/3 of that of the United States, yet it has nearly 4 times as many people. It is a land of almost infinite ethnic, religious, and linguistic diversity. Although Hindi and English are most widely spoken, there are 16 officially recognized languages and more than 1,000 others still in use. To be truthful, we found the 5 days and 6 nights which we spent in India to be the most stressful and challenging of our entire trip, and the greatest culture shock. The day we were there, the first monsoon of the season descended on Bombay, and we found ourselves being driven along the city's rain-soaked but still teeming streets in an old taxicab without any windshield wipers. 2 points of interest stood out for us in Bombay. We stopped for a fascinating look at the Dhobi Ghat, the world's largest open-air laundry, where countless people were soaking and pounding all kinds of clothes in rows and rows of big stone tubs, even in the rain. But for us, the most meaningful part of our Bombay tour was a visit to the small house on a side street, which had been for many years the residence of the great Indian apostle of nonviolence, Mahatma Gandhi. We went out on this balcony where Gandhi and Nehru had announced important steps leading to India's final independence in 1947, brought about by nonviolent means. Despite the rain, our woman guide was most helpful and hospitable. The heart of India, past and present, lies in the north-central region, in the area around Delhi, which was made the nation's modern capital in 1911. Here, after an Air India flight north from Bombay, we were to spend the next 4 days touring the historic 3-city triangle made up of Delhi, Agra, and Jaipur. We would travel in a well-used car driven by a turbaned Sikh chauffeur for a total of 750 kilometers. Our first stop in New Delhi was to view the impressive government buildings laid out, designed, and constructed early in this century, when Delhi was just becoming India's new capital, in a manner which made them the supreme example of British imperial architecture. The differing structures serve a wide variety of official functions. Actually, there are 2 Delhis, old and new, both of which we visited. One entrance avenue to New Delhi is marked by a monumental arch known as the India Gate, designed as a war memorial to Indian soldiers who died in World War I. In Old Delhi, we found a peace monument showing Mahatma Gandhi leading his historic nonviolent march to the sea to protest Britain's salt tax. Nearby was another.
The body was cremated, and the remains, the ashes are some of them lying scattered under the platform, and the rest were scattered all over the India in rivers and in the sea.
This simple marble platform marks the site of Gandhi's cremation and honors his absolute commitment to peace and love. Driving through the city or stopping at a mosque, we were constantly surrounded by all kinds of vehicles and all kinds of people, most of whose necessary lifestyles were in such contrast to ours. Dominating Old Delhi is the Great Red Fort, built in the early 1600s to surround and protect the ruler's palace, located behind its red sandstone walls. Nearby stood an even more ancient architectural wonder, a 250-foot-tall sandstone tower built in 1200 AD by Turkish invaders to symbolize Muslim ascendancy. It's 5 stories high with tapering cylinders and was said to be the tallest freestanding stone tower in the world. In the courtyard is a strange, uncorroded iron pillar dating back to the 4th century. Legend has it that if you stand with your back to the pillar and completely encircle it with your arms, you will have good luck, at least for the rest of the day. It certainly worked for us. The next day, our turbaned chauffeur drove us hair-raisingly fast and far, past all kinds of vehicles, people, and animals, to world-famous Agra, stopping en route to observe a native snake charmer with his basket of slithering cobras. We could see also here that elephants are as highly regarded in India as in Thailand. In Agra, after viewing this smaller, earlier mausoleum, we were to have the supreme aesthetic experience of seeing for the first time in actuality the incomparable Taj Mahal. What a thrill it was to look through the entrance arch and see before us this shining masterpiece of architectural invention. It was built in the early 1600s by a Mughal emperor to memorialize the loss of his most beloved wife. It took 18 years for master artisans from all over the world to create this marble mausoleum, perfect and exquisite in every detail. Its size is as overwhelming as its beauty, and standing in its presence invokes a lifetime of awe. On the way from Agra to Jaipur, we had another awesome experience visiting Fatehpur Sikri, the uninhabited remains of a fantastic city palace built on a country plain more than 400 years ago by the great Indian ruler Akbar to be his capital, but abandoned after only 18 years because of lack of water. We couldn't believe what we saw there. Our most memorable happening near Jaipur, the third city in India's historic tourist triangle, was riding an elegantly robed elephant up the long stone roadway to the elaborate hilltop fort and palace of Amber. This was a happy way to end our India stay, and we were glad at last to be heading for home, flying almost due west from Delhi to the Middle Eastern Arab country of Kuwait. After just a short stop there to refuel, our plane made a beeline across Turkey and Europe to London, England, our 9th country. We stayed one night at a hotel in London near the Tower Bridge, where they have a graceful statue of a young woman swimming with a dolphin, which we felt was symbolic of our trip. Then we welcomed our final flight across the Atlantic from London to New York and took a Connecticut limousine back to our home in Wethersfield, very tired but fully satisfied and exceedingly grateful for our extreme good fortune.
Well, Meg, we finally made it.
Around the world and back to Wethersfield.
In 6 weeks, we've flown over 20,000 miles.
And 9 countries.
Now I think we're ready to just sit here on the front steps of our home. And after seeing all those wonders around the world, now we're ready to contemplate the wonders of home.
Right.
We hope you've enjoyed this Barstow travel adventure film. We'll be releasing more of Robbins Barstow's home movies on this YouTube channel during 2021. Click here to subscribe and receive the latest updates. Meanwhile, enjoy these other films by a master of home movie storytelling in the pre-digital era.